I don't need to introduce you to Wagner Moura, and this time is not a joke. I really don't, I mean. He was the main character in that Netflix show you loved 10 years ago. You're still using the memes. And you know, Civil War, not the Marvel one, the one with Kirsten Dunst, the movie that everyone wanted to be about Republicans bad, but ended up being about, I don't know, the ethics of photojournalism? You loved him as the sexiest embodiment of death ever in Puss in Boots, come on! But the funniest thing is, if you ask my grandma who Wagner Moura is, she isn't going to mention any of those, really. Her brain will immediately go to, oh my god, it's Olavo from the Paraíso Tropical soap opera. My knees still get weak when I hear him calling Bebel his little bitch.
Você é a cachorra mais burra aqui desse calçadão. Só você não viu ainda que eu amo você também, sua cachorra, sua piranha.
Complimentary, I swear. Brazilian soap operas are wild. Okay, quick recap. My name's Cecily, I'm a Brazilian YouTuber living in Europe, well, not now, and this channel is mostly me talking about Pokemon. Well, mostly, because now and then I will take a detour into gender, politics, or whatever piece of culture is currently haunting my brain. And last year, I had a very successful video about another Brazilian potential Oscar nomination. This is actually happening quite a bit, right? There, I explained Gwyneth Paltrow drama, but also analyzed the nominated film I'm Still Here as a strong criticism of one of the bloodiest dictatorships in Latin America. I also talked about why Brazilians were losing their minds on social media, our cultural isolation, our obsession with sharing, our desire for the world to hear our stories. It was a whole moment. People loved it, people clipped it without permission on TikTok and took it out of context. I even got an email, and this is true, telling me to completely pivot my channel into educating the world about Brazilian cinema. They even offered to write the scripts for me, which was certainly something. Even though it was my most successful video, I definitely did not want to just transition into a cinema channel, and honestly, if I only speak about things Brazilians want to hear, it defeats the whole purpose of the thing. I thought it was a one-and-done thing, because I didn't want to do something just for the views if I didn't have anything to add to the conversation. Until last October, I watched the pre-screening of Cannes award-winning movie The Secret Agent in Berlin, in a special session featuring the director, Kleber Mendonça Filho, whom I adore, and as soon as the credits rolled in, something clicked. I was mesmerized, completely pulled in. We had a Q&A afterwards, and listening to Klebinho talk about Recife, Carnaval, the hairy leg, the clicker clicked stronger. I briefly fangirled Kleber, a member of the distribution team interviewed me for TikTok, I logged it as a 4.5 on Letterboxd, walked out into the rain and spent an hour yapping about this film with my friends, and at some point I just thought, yeah, we're doing it again, aren't we?
Our film is also about memory. To see Brazilians seeing themselves represented in artists. Because for a long time during the Bolsonaro's period, we were so attacked with so many lies and horrible things that to see Brazilians rooting for Fernanda Torres and for Walter Salles and for the film and seeing and thinking like these people represent us for me was the most special thing about that.
Wagner Moura is Brazil's little boyfriend, our very own Pedro Pascal. Not only well known for being kinda hot and horny in primetime soap operas, but in cinema too. Since the early days of his career, he was doing unexpected comedy roles, acting alongside Penelope Cruz in the camp masterpiece Woman on Top, and our Brazilian Pikachu, Fernanda Torres in Basic Sanitation. But I think anyone would agree that what propelled Wagner into national stardom was being the lead in Elite Squad, which allegedly was supposed to be a film that criticizes the brutality and murderous intent of Rio's elite police force, something that completely backfired in the opposite way. I don't know, Brazil is a country where urban violence is really scary and usually the biggest concern for everyone, which means that a film that showed cops who would cross any lines, even murder and torture, to fight against the evil criminals, turned the criticism of the police force into a glorification of violent policing as the only way to protect people. Wagner Moura saw his character turning overnight into a right-wing icon, kind of a fascist Batman, an incorruptible cop who will go to any lengths to fight crime. Elite Squad became the most successful film of the 2000s in Brazil and widely influential in pop culture and in public policy, getting popular alongside the phrase that a good criminal is a dead one. Keep this phrase in mind because it's a surprise too that will help us later. But the whole situation was kind of odd because suddenly Wagner involuntarily turned into this Punisher-esque icon, which was not only not the original intent of Elite Squad, but also pretty far from Wagner's own ideological beliefs. He has spent the last 2 decades working tirelessly to fight that accidental message, not only with the sequel to Elite Squad being much more clear in its criticisms of the police, but in his own left-wing political activism through film and direct action. But in one way or another, being the star of the biggest film of the decade ended up propelling him into international stardom, mostly after being chosen to play Pablo Escobar in Narcos, one of the first ever original series produced by the fresh, up-and-coming streaming service Netflix. Wagner Moura moved to Medellin and learned to speak Spanish in like 2 months, something that the Colombians were sure to notice. But we don't mind because he looks cool, put on an incredible performance, and got like 40 new pounds. This exposition made it so that most of the roles that Wagner Moura has done since Narcos have been international ones, from Civil War to Mr. and Mrs. Smith to Puss in Boots, which I know you love because that's probably the best DreamWorks movie ever, but that also cemented his status in Brazilian superstardom, which he has used to be extremely active politically, mostly during that period during 2018 to 2022, what we in Brazil like to collectively call the shitty years, when government was run by a military right-wing homophobic TV star who plotted political assassinations, loved the dictatorship, and refused to accept his loss in elections. Does that remind you of someone? Well, this one was called Jair, and he spread fake news as government policy, mocked people who were in COVID deathbed, then refused to buy vaccines, causing Brazil to have 6% of all pandemic deaths worldwide. Back then, Wagner Moura had directed his first feature film, Marighella, a biopic for a left-wing revolutionary politician who fought against the military dictatorship in the 70s, which the Bolsonaro administration, according to Moura, was actively working to censor and prevent from being released. The film had a 2-year delay in its Brazilian premiere, being screened only in 2021, 2 years after the international release in 2019. That's the same year in which Kleber Mendonça Filho released his film Bacurau, a western-ish masterpiece about resisting imperialism through community, a village in Pernambuco that gets erased from global maps, leaving its citizens vulnerable to becoming hunting prey for bored international billionaires. People from the global north deciding this is just a small, unimportant place in South America for them to do as they please, and what they bring is violence and death. It became an instant cult classic, being a hit mostly due to an apotheotic and gory third act that was actually really cathartic to see, the gentle and kind citizens of Bacurau finding strength to resist the power of imperialism is more important today than ever. I still think it's my favorite movie from Kleber and I highly recommend it. But again, as an action thriller with heavy political messaging, it became really popular on left-wing bubbles, and one performative male moviegoer went viral after bringing 11 different dates to watch it with. You know, to show how woke he was. Hashtag bring woke back. But as two very relevant vocal figures on the cultural left, both Kleber and Wagner became common targets for attacks from Bolsonaro supporters. It was this moment of persecution of any openly left-wing artist and media that caused them both to get closer, and how the project that would become The Secret Agent began to happen.
But what really put us together actually was politics, because in Brazil from 2018 till 2022, Brazil was under a very bad moment, and whoever was vocal against what was going on there suffered lots of consequences. So myself and Kleber had lots in common in that sense. So I think that the genesis of the Secret Agent comes from that time.
As I write the script, The Secret Agent and Wagner Moura have both just been nominated for Best Actor and Best Drama at the Golden Globes, following in the steps of the subjects of my last year's video, Fernanda Torres and I'm Still Here, all down to the horde of fans engaging massively in posts mentioning Wagner in a similar way that happened to Fernanda last year. I'm Still Here taking home the Oscar of Best Foreign Film was celebrated countrywide, and awarding ceremonies have seemed to learn how passionate Brazilians are about people wanting to hear our stories. So much so that next year's Golden Globes Tribute Awards have been announced to be hosted in Rio for the first time ever. They learned that we give them that highly sought-after organic engagement. After being awarded a 13-minute standing ovation at Cannes, Best Actor and Best Director, there's a good chance that we might be looking into a second Brazilian Oscar nomination in a row.
Also, as I'm editing this video, The Secret Agent just won Best Foreign Film at the Critics' Choice Awards, albeit in a bit of an awkward way.
Yeah. I have a very special surprise for you. Really? Congratulations. What? The Critics' Choice Award for Best Foreign Language Film goes to The Secret Agent.
Yeah?
You're winners tonight, baby! Winner! Did you have any idea?
No.
Regardless, that leaves a second Brazilian Oscar nomination in a row closer than ever.
Which will lead to the country completely losing its mind again, and not always in the best of ways. It was quite embarrassing to see a lot of hate and even slut-shaming that was directed at the victory of Mikey Madison last year. Hating on a girl for playing a sex worker is the coldest ever of takes. Come on, it's fun to be competitive and all, but we all need to know when to chill off, and nothing justifies this kind of online harassment. Do we need to make a drama when we all know deep down what the best movie of 2025 was? Obviously, Conclave. I mean, spoiler alert for Conclave, 3, 2, 1, but Catholic Gossip Girl with a trans mask pope? Come on, count me the fuck in! And as I had established in my video about Fernanda, the film the Academy thinks is the best one is so unimportant when compared to the big picture. It is just a silly little statue that has been awarded to Green Book in the past, and the importance of receiving it is infinitely small when compared to the importance of people around the world hearing the story of Eunice Paiva. The importance of a weird movie about a messy spy from Recife getting projected into rooms in Istanbul, Berlin, and Edinburgh, where very few people have even heard of Recife's Carnaval. And the reason why I decided to write this video is not because of how similar this story of The Secret Agent and I'm Still Here are. No, dear stranger line, I'm writing it because they are radically different in fundamental ways. Because The Secret Agent is not a story about an upper middle class family in Rio with all the formal poise that a film based on a true story asks for. The Secret Agent is about how fiction can oftentimes convey some aspect of truth much better than a documentary or journalism or official history with a capital H ever could.
I thought that I was writing a period piece, but then I came to realize that I was actually writing about contemporary Brazil, because many of the very backwards thinking that existed in the military regime somehow made it back to contemporary Brazil over the last 10 years. The way of talking about the LGBT community, about women, the whole thing about racism in Brazil. So everything kind of came back 50 years ago, like it used to be 50 years ago.
The film starts as the main character, Armando, is on the road and on the run. He's not a secret agent at all, but as a college professor defending public research from the greed of an influential industrialist with ties to the dictatorship, he gets a target on his back and joins a low-budget witness protection program. After being put on a no-fly list and have a bounty on his head, he runs away to be with his young son, try to get a fake passport and leave the country while two hitmen are on his tail. Armando finds a hiding place in the safe house of the sweet, funny, and show-stopping Dona Sebastiana, alongside a few other not-secret agents who are scared, kind, flirty, and bad at keeping a cover, in his hometown of Recife. Recife is the capital of the state of Pernambuco and an absolutely gorgeous city with rich culture, a flag so pretty it looks like a pride flag, many shark attacks, local folk legends, and being right next to Olinda, it has one of the most incredible carnavais in the world. Kleber grew up there, and it's almost like his life's calling is to tell stories of Recife. Mind you, those are not stories that are traditionally heard in Brazilian mainstream. With a storytelling industry hyper-focused on Rio and São Paulo, Recife is often just a background, a short mention, mostly when we are talking about memories of the dictatorship. From Eunice Paiva to Marighella and Stuart Angel, the stories that we tell about this period are often stories of the metropolis. The Northeast, the Sertão, are relegated to be seen more as a caricature, a soundtrack, or an orange filter over a video. Just like the village of Bacurau, Pernambuco is often erased from the map in southeastern cinema. This southern look of prejudice to the north is foundational in Kleber's filmography, be it from the couple showing their disdain for Bacurau, or the industrialist Girotti thinking less of the technological research that happens in Recife in The Secret Agent. A question that Kleber cinema always asks is, which stories are there to tell about the Brazils that have been erased? In the past 3 months after I watched The Secret Agent, I had many conversations with many friends about it. I tried to keep away from other videos here on YouTube before I could write the script, but I think one of the best conversations I had was with my friend and retired YouTube video essayist turned college professor, Tavo Silva. I used to be on the Patreon of his channel back in 2018, and we met for a few drinks when I was in town. And of course, we yapped about YouTube for hours, and I told him about this video. As a historian and researcher about historiography, he had some incredible takes and references, so I basically picked up my phone, recorded our conversation, and at the end he just said, "Do with that whatever you want." And so I am. And the next part of the video is heavily influenced by that conversation. I think that was an incredible talk to make me see this movie for one of what I believe is its strongest angles. The point of view of the historian as the person who rebuilds history from fragments. It really shows how funny the perspective of the viewer is, because this film is told back and forth in time with girls listening to old tapes of what happened back in the 70s. I thought they were true crime podcasters because yes, I am chronically online, but Tavos clocked straight away that they were university archivists. And the question they are here to ask is, what is the role of memory in telling the official history? Because memory is often like that, as said by one of the characters in the movie. I'm not sure if I remember it or if I created a memory because someone told me it happened. It's fragmented, it's unreliable, but sometimes it can't help us to find truth. Just like telling a fictional story about a historical fact, just like the hairy leg, just like The Secret Agent.
Because in fact, this film would not exist without my previous film, which is a film essay, a documentary. It's a very different kind of film. But because I spent so much time looking at archive material and old newspapers at the archive, I confirmed many of the memories that I had about the 1970s, and that gave me the basis on which I could develop The Secret Agent.
Because here's the funny thing, the first thing you will notice about The Secret Agent is that it is set in Carnaval. And I think it's always really interesting to tell Brazilian stories during Carnaval, not only because it adds a special chaotic tropical sauce to it, but mostly because it's a period of time that kind of exists outside of space and time. If you're a foreigner, I'm not sure if you understand the sheer magnitude of this week-long party for Brazilians, but it's that small moment in the year where hard-working people who are oppressed by hierarchies, religion, morality, and, well, imperialism can finally breathe, let go, be free to love, to live. Actually, forget that. Chico Buarque wrote it much better. To have the right to a fleeting joy, a breathless epidemic called Carnaval. Take the streets away from cars, away from productive society, and back to the people. A subversion that is essential to the story of The Secret Agent. There's a Russian philosopher who lived before hair transplants were a thing, called Mikhail Bakhtin, who writes about this process of carnivalization, which here I will use as my theoretical basis, so you can view me as a well-read video essayist. When Carnaval happens, hierarchies are suspended, authority is inverted or mocked. This entire film is about rules not being followed. Rules of what a good secret agent should do not to blow their cover, rules of how the police should act, rules of how a hitman should act, rules of how a historian should work, rules of what is appropriate to do in a cinema, and the rules of good journalism. And it starts in the opening scene with a body left out in the open in front of a gas station after a failed robbery attempt. The police won't do their job and collect the body until Carnaval is over, but they will pull over to try and collect a bribe from Armando on the run. Under the cover of Carnaval, but also under the cover of the dictatorship. The police can use the mayhem of the party to do as they please. Hold hearings before hours to protect a rich white lady, or even do passeios, illegal murders to get rid of people they deem undesirable. Vagabonds, queer, communists. Do you remember that phrase I told you to remember at the beginning of the video? A good criminal is a dead one, but not the gunman hired to kill Armando. No, those are good friends of the police. And these extrajudicial murders are hidden in the middle of the Carnaval body count. 91 dead, but it might get to 100, and it kind of does by the end. And it's this drive of murder from the police, based on racism and very much present in real police today, will cause sometimes even good kids to get wrongly executed, as they refer to the agronomy student whose leg shows up inside the shark. But Talking about the leg, Carnaval allows truths that cannot be spoken under normal power structures to emerge. Truths such as the zombie, spooky, hairy leg.
They couldn't actually say what happened last night in the park. Members of the gay community were attacked, and they could not say that the police or the military attacked them, beat them up, and sent them to the trauma ward in the hospital. They found a way of saying it without saying it. They came up with a hairy leg. So the hairy leg attacked again 2 nights ago at the park. It comes hopping out of the dark and kicks people and sends people to hospital.
The hairy leg is about anonymous violence, a symbol for people, queer people at that, getting kicked in the dark by legs that newspapers can't publish the names of. Of course, filmed in an absolutely camp stop-motion horror 70s scene with its own Wilhelm scream, because this movie is also a homage to that period of cinema. The folk tale of the hairy leg is about trying to hide the truth in a non-historical way, true fiction. If I'm Still Here, as a more formalistic, based on a true story dictatorship film, can be closer to a formal historical document that will out loud state that some repression agents were actually good guys, then The Secret Agent is the hairy leg, with its own carnivalized version of history, accepting that official history is inevitably incomplete. Because of that, fiction, myth, and excess are valid tools we use to search for what truth we can find in memory. Because even when you're telling a true story, you are choosing what to show, what to hide, what to exaggerate, what to turn into cinema. The love for Recife cinema is symbolized by the Cinema São Luís, which is a safe space for Armando. In there, he meets with Elsa, the woman who is trying to save him from the persecution of the industrialist Girotti and the Brazilian government. A persecution that is due to his commitment to scientific research on subjects that would prove to be of vital importance 50 years later, electric cars and lithium batteries. Girotti was interested in keeping those developments in his own private investments instead of the public universities. The cinema is where Armando tells his story, so different from the many other stories told on those screens. Stories of much better prepared secret agents, the James Bonds of Hollywood, who can't be compared to the carnivalized, inverted, amateurish, and too kind for his own good secret agent that is Armando. The spies from the US cinema have all the infrastructure they need, gadgets, weapons, disguises, and basal exposition. A license to kill. The Brazilian secret agent hates violence, doesn't carry a gun, but would kill Girotti with a hammer if he needed to.
And one thing that I told Wagner, I said, your character will never carry a gun, will never pull a gun or shoot someone. Just, it will never happen in this film. But since we are dealing with some men who deal with violence every day, I thought that that whole sequence should lead to a bloodbath.
As Elsa says, other witness protection programs are done with lots of money by their own government. The carnivalized secret agent is just a college professor who has to hide in a very improvised way, in a Brazilian way, to find protection from the government itself. Armando has choppy communication with his contacts in Brasilia, can't use his fake name if his life depended on it, and it kinda does, and his disguise is basically trimming his hair off. Funnily enough, his long hair was the first thing that Girotti noticed about him when they met. The other safe space for Armando is the home of Dona Sebastiana, the rising star of the film, who holds the hearts of audiences worldwide and is probably the most talked about aspect of the entire film. Tânia Maria, who started acting at 72 years of age, is now a national star, an internet phenomenon, being praised by critics for her magnetic charisma. She is the heart of the secret agent, not only for her performance, but for what her character represents for the story. The people who end up at her home are put in this position of amateur secret agents and are all just scared. They didn't sign up to go into hiding or to use a fake name. They are craving connection, craving to tell their stories over some cachaça. They are denied the release of Carnaval. Armando doesn't want to keep his cover next to these people because he's tired and he's angry. All he has is his son, and all he wants to do is to live his life. Dona Sebastiana's home is welcoming to all who might need community, from Angolan refugees to queer kids and Siamese cats. This is also fiction's way to tell a harsh truth, that most of the people who fought the Brazilian dictatorship weren't professionals. They were students, artists, and union leaders. They were just people. And here, spoiler alert until the following timestamp. That's if I didn't go through most of the plot already, but this is Act 3 stuff. Okay, let's go. Because the tragedy of it all is that while Carnaval provides cover and protection and subversion for all among the sea of people, it also perverts and desecrates what were supposed to be this story's safe spaces. The Cinema São Luís is where Armando gets sold out by one of the workers. And it is in Dona Sebastiana's courtyard that he is shot 4 times and left to die on the floor, without ever being able to say goodbye to his son. But the ending is as anticlimactic as it can be. As is the case with Carnaval, nobody's really working, so everything gets outsourced. While Armando is murdered, the hitman who was hired to kill him is on the beach chilling out. And after a gory shootout scene on shoes, we cut back to the historiographer in the present, just reading about what had happened in a newspaper from 40 years before. Just like the work of historians, we never see the full picture. We are denied the classic secret agent movie finale. Because that is not what this film is about. One thing that I remember from the conversation with Kleber was that he said he never wrote the death scene for Armando. He just couldn't come to write that down in the script. I think it's about not wanting to glorify this moment in violence, but the way that Armando is effectively killed is much more subtle and more cruel. He's only really dead once his memory is forgotten. In an earlier scene, Armando and his son Fernando are driving through Recife. Fernando says he really misses his mom, who died before the movie began. Armando says that as long as they are there, remembering his mom, their memory will always keep her present and alive. But in the film's final scene, when the archivist finds grown-up Fernando, he admits that he doesn't remember his father at all. He can't distinguish between real and fabricated memories, so he isn't sure. The archivist knows Fernando's dead better than him. That's the ultimate way that the dictatorship managed to kill Armando, to kill the records and memories of him. The newspapers list Armando as a criminal, and when there is no memory, the official history is what counts. And that's the end of the film. What happened might be fictional, but it is a really common story to hear, of a generation raised by their grandparents, with families disappeared and vanished from records. When the dictatorship was over, the military members who committed crimes back then, such as the police squad from the film, received full amnesty. Crimes forgotten as if they never happened. And that's the importance of films such as The Secret Agent, to tell stories, even if fictionalized, that help us remember a little bit of truth. Remembering this truth is how we don't let things like this happen again. In many press conferences promoting The Secret Agent, mainly in the United States, Wagner Moura talks about this memory being key in protecting democracy in Brazil. Because we fight hard to keep this memory alive, it results in really different approaches Brazil and the US had on recent attacks against democracy. On January 6, 2021, Donald Trump agitated a crowd against the US Capitol, not recognizing his defeat in the presidential elections. On January 8, 2022, Jair Bolsonaro agitated a crowd against Brazilian Congress, not recognizing his defeat in the presidential elections. Trump is now president and coordinating horrific attacks against immigrants, trans people, and Latin America's own sovereignty. Maybe what's lacking here is some much-needed memory about the Monroe Doctrine, because Brazilian memory is what caused Bolsonaro to be currently having hiccups in jail for the next 27 years. Because Brazil, Eunice, and Armando know what happens when you give amnesty to crimes against democracy. When you just forget them and let them go unpunished. And memory is what keeps us safe. For now. As long as we remember.
The award for Best Picture.
Or, as we call it in Brazil, Best Foreign Picture.
And I guess that's it. What did you think of my 2026 H-Bomber mousetrap, where I start a video gossiping about a hot actor and Oscar nominations, only to end up with Bakhtin literary theory and a reminder that amnesty for crimes against democracy is a really fucked up thing to do? I think this one got a bit dense, and I hope I didn't lose you along the way, dear stranger online. Also, I wrote this script before the US invasion of Venezuela, so a light-hearted piece about Latin Americans seeking validation from a US award seems more out of place than ever, but I still think this is an important story to tell, mostly when I know I have a lot of left-wing followers from the US asking what can be done in a moment like this. Hopefully this video, this film, and the stories of Dona Sebastiana and Bacurau can point to paths forward somehow. But again, this is a video about the Oscars, so I think that to close up this one, I need to bring you all the way back to the silly little statues. So now, this message is to all the Brazilians in chat. I know winning is fun. I'm an Aries. I know we want to root and have more likes than everyone else on Instagram and raise hashtags, and that's all fun and games, and let's do that, because we know that if Tânia Maria doesn't get nominated for Best Supporting Actress, this thing is entirely rigged. The nominations should be out the week following this video, so of course I will be watching and rooting, but I think it's also important to keep in mind, silly little statue. Awarded by gringos, Wagner might not even get nominated. We might just be getting baited here, but I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I don't care what people in LA think the best film of the year is, much less in 2026 than last year. What is really important here, and with cinema to a degree, is to tell stories. And to be able to hear stories from Korea, from Latvia, and tell the stories from Brazil on an international stage is why this is so exciting at the end of the day. Whoever gets to zoom in on the live stream camera in their little party is up to them, but isn't it cool that we're here again having this conversation? 2 years in a row, baby, let's go. I don't care if we don't win. I don't care if Mikey Madison wins again. That is so not the point. If Brazilian cinema keeps getting talked about around the world, from north to south, and I get to once a year talk to you, Catherine from Toronto, about incredibly important and fundamentally Brazilian stories such as this, from Rio, from Recife, from Minas Gerais, I'm already happy enough.
And everything is practical. Somebody asked me last month if we used AI in the films. Come on. No. This is a film, all right?